Hi guys, this is Connie. Back for more Connie Reads Brian's Return. We have caught up with all the readings, but there is an author's note, and because it's been a while since I read this at the beginning, I'm not sure what I haven't read off the book covers and such. So I'm just going to start with, basically this is just going to be Connie Reads the conclusion. But this is the author's note first, and then I think there's about the author, and then there's the book covers. So here we go. Author's note. Once I knew the truth of the woods, which came to me about the time I wrote Hatchet. Once I knew what happened, I knew I would write this book. It is perhaps even true that I always knew I would write this book in a way before I wrote Hatchet, or The River, or Brian's Winter. A thing happens when you've been taken by the bush, by wilderness. Much is made, and rightly so, of the effects of post-traumatic stress disorder on people who have been in combat. And perhaps there is some of that in the effect that living in the wilderness has on a person. If such a thing can be good and not bad, for when a person has once been possessed by the wild, it is not possible for him to be truly normal again. I started hunting and trapping and fishing in the north woods of Minnesota when I was about 11. Due to the difficult nature of my childhood, I could not be home and spent much of the time, to the detriment of my grades, in the woods with either an old lemonwood bow and half a dozen homemade arrows or a worn old single-shot Remington .22 rifle that fired only half the time and never ejected right. I had to dig the expended cartridge case out with the tip of a pocket knife. Virtually all that happens to Brian in these books has happened to me at some point or other in my life. I've been in 2 forced landings in light planes, though not nearly as severe as the crash Brian suffers in Hatchet, although that crash is based on a true incident. I have hunted large and small game extensively with a straight bow, have been attacked by moose several times, and have had a bear play with me as the bear in this book does with Brian. It is a humbling experience to feel like prey. Have had a doe jump into my canoe to get away from flies, have eaten what Brian eats, made fires and cooked the way he cooks, worked and slept beneath a canoe the way he does in this book, lived in lean-tos and holes in the ground, and found and believe in my medicine, similar to Billy's. Mine is a crow. For nearly 12 years, I lived completely in the bush. For most of that period, if I did not kill it with a bow and arrow, or grow it in a garden, or pick it in the woods, berries and hazelnuts, I did not eat it. I supported a family off the woods, as perhaps Brian will. We bought only salt and seasonings and clothing. All food and shelter and heat came from the bush or a garden, and it must be said that the quality of the food I ate then far surpasses anything I can buy from the store now, either vegetable or animal, though I am now a vegetarian. And it was perhaps the healthiest time of my life. Once you have seen the horizon, have followed it, have lived with nature in all its vicious beauty, it is impossible to come back to normal life. Like Brian, I tried. I bought a house in town with a yard and neighbors because I thought that was the thing to do. And inside a week, I was pacing like a panther in a cage, trying to see out, see across the town to the hills, to the trees, to the woods. I simply could not do it. I went back to a hut in the mountains of New Mexico, and though it was a small version of the bush, I had neighbors as close as 3 miles away, and it was only 12 miles to a small town. I could see the trees, and the sky, and the horizon, and for a time it kept me from going insane. But it was still not enough, still only pretend wilderness. And I found myself taking longer trips on that horse days at a time, until I would hit a fence that stopped me. And in the end, it was the same as before. I paced, pulled against the imaginary chain that held me, hated not being able to move toward the horizon. So then I discovered sled dogs and ran 2 Iditarods. When I developed heart disease after running those 2 races, I had to give up my sled dogs and could not live in northern winters. And that denied the wild to me. I could not go back to the bush, as Brian does in this book, though I tried several times, and I'm not certain what would have become of me had I not rediscovered the sea. The sea saved me, and it continues to save me. I have always loved it, and at times in my life I had small boats and sailed, not on any long trips, just to local areas in California. But I had moved away from the coast, and about the time it became evident that the hut in the New Mexico mountains was still too tame, if that's the right word, I found the sea again, right where it has always been. Bought an old 38-foot sailboat, which I spent 2 years restoring, and went out into what is possibly the only big wilderness left, the Pacific Ocean. I am there now. It is the winter of 1997-98, and El Nino has made it possible for me to get across the Pacific. Has made it impossible for me to get across the Pacific until spring. And so I sit in San Diego, repairing bits on the boat that seem to break simply because they are on a boat. I have made 2 trips down to Mexico with the boat. Boats have lives, souls, and they are feminine, is named Felicity, to see the Sea of Cortez. Last spring I took her from Mexico up the west coast of the United States, up the Inside Passage to Alaska, and then turned and came down the outside back to San Diego in preparation for going across to Hawaii, then down to the Marshall Islands, and from there to Australia. Unfortunately, as Brian finds on his return to the bush, man may propose, but nature disposes. El Nino has intervened and is lashing the ocean between San Diego and Hawaii with storms and wild southwesterly winds that Felicity could not possibly buck. And so I am writing this on a laptop while seagulls fight over garbage up in the dumpster at the top of the public docks. There is a soft rain coming down. I can hear it pattering on the skylight hatch over my head, and I have Mozart on the tape player while I wait. Not long, just until the wind changes, and then I will go again, always, as Brian must always go. Gary Paulson, on the sloop, Felicity, San Diego Bay, February 1998. Cool. About the author. Gary Paulson is the distinguished author of many critically acclaimed books for young people, including 3 Newbery Honor Books, The Winter Room, Hatchet, and Dog Song. His novel, The Hay Meadow, received the Western Writers of America Golden Spur Award. Among his newest books are The Glass Cafe, How Angel Peterson Got His Name, Caught by the Sea, Guts, The True Stories Behind Hatchet, and the Brian Books. The Beatfields, Alita's Song, A Companion to the Cook Camp, Soldier's Heart, The Transvaal Saga, My Life in Dog Years, Sarnie, A Life Remembered, A Companion to Nightjohn, Brian's Winter and Brian's Hunt, Companions to Hatchet, Father Water, Mother Woods, and 5 books about Francis Tuckett's adventures in the Old West. Gary Paulson has also published fiction and nonfiction for adults, as well as picture books illustrated by his wife, the painter Ruth Wright Paulson. Their most recent book is Canoe Days. The Paulsons live in New Mexico and on the Pacific Ocean. And then there's a shameless plug for another book. And that's the end of the book. I think we've already read that exact same thing about the author. Don't know if I read Brian's Return, but you already know the gist of it, so I'm sure I probably put it in the intro. So, that is Brian's Return. I apologize again for those who kept commenting and going, "Where's chapter 17? Where's chapter 18? Finish the book." I had essentially finished the book. I just didn't realize that it was not uploaded before my 2-month loss of video and pictures. So there you go. Be careful with that and enjoy, please and thank you. And I always look forward to suggestions. I don't get the opportunity to write them all down immediately, but I do see the comments, and hopefully I start catching up on them as soon as I can, whenever there aren't, life interruptions like you potentially hear in the background. So that's about it. Be careful with that and enjoy, please and thank you, and I will see you for the next book chapter installment.